Well, a long time ago, there was a video game called Donkey Kong. You were a giant gorilla who had to get his banana horde back from this lizard called King K. Rool. Now, after you defeated him, all right, so this is what it looked like in the old school Super Nintendo, okay? So this is how I remember him. It wasn't all this fancy modern 3D stuff. So after you beat the king, and it wasn't too difficult, but you defeated him, and the credits started to roll, and as credits do, you're pretty excited. You beat the game. You have accomplished greatness. At the end of those credits, it would end with the question mark. The end? Question mark? And if you weren't careful, the next thing you knew, the boss that you thought you had defeated gets up and defeats you, forcing you to do the entire boss fight over again. So lame as a kid. Today, we finish Matthew. Jesus announces he is leaving, and the credits begin to roll. It is the end. But just like in Donkey Kong, is it really the end? Or is it just the beginning of what Jesus is about to do in the world? So we're in Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. And we'll be looking at the last recorded words of Jesus on earth. So often when it comes to, you guys are very familiar with this passage, it's called the Great Commission. We skim over and we can sometimes forget what the Great Commission is even based on. We can ignore, in my opinion, what is the most important part of the commission. Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20 says, "Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age.'" So we're going to break down what Jesus' last statements into two major points. First, we're going to focus on verse 18, and Jesus has this idea that Jesus has been given all authority, and how this truth generates momentum, and pretty much like a Formula One racer car, thrusts us into the next point where Jesus Christ then sends out his disciples in verses 19 through 20. So this first point is, it says Jesus has been given all authority. It says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." All authority in heaven and earth. So you get to thinking, though, it's like, okay, what is different this time? Hasn't Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, God, always had authority? I mean, did he suddenly lose it? Has Jesus never had it? And this is different? And I got to thinking, I'm like, okay, so throughout the book of Matthew, we have seen that Jesus has placed himself under other authorities while he's been on earth. He has placed himself under the authority of Mary and Joseph as his parents. He's placed himself under the religious rulers in the synagogues and the temple at times. He has placed himself under foreign Roman authority and encouraged them to pay taxes. And he also put himself under the authority of Pilate and allowed himself to be crucified. He placed himself under the authority of nature and his physical limitations. He needed to sleep. And if we think about it, Jesus didn't teleport around. He walked on his two legs, okay? And he even became obedient to death. See, Jesus, when he became man, something happened that had never happened before in history. God became man. He didn't cease to be God. He never ceased to be man, but he became the God man. And this is something that never happened before. And it was up until, I think, this point. So yes, Jesus had authority. He was the second person of the Trinity. If we turn back to, what is it? Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. But John chapter, I'm going to get ahead of myself, but I'll read that one again. John chapter 1, verse 3 says, all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. If you go and you make and create everything, you have authority over that. So what is different this time around? Why is this significant? And I believe that here, after Jesus Christ, after God's Son had pretty much became a human being, he was obedient to the Father's plan. He walked and conquered death, and it was at this point where a man was given authority over all the things in heaven and all the things under and all the things on the earth. He became, the God-man was given authority over everything. See, let's see where we hit so far. So in Matthew chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, this is Jesus. He says, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So authority to a certain extent had been given to him. He then said to the paralytic, rise, pick up your bed, and go home. And he arose and went home. At another time, in Matthew chapter 21, verses 23 to 24, Jesus entered the temple, and the chief priests and the elders of the people came up to him as he was teaching and said, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? And Jesus then explains that he is under authority. He says, I will ask you the one question, and if you tell me answer, then I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. Then he asks them, but this passage here seems to show that Jesus is under authority. Yet in Matthew 9, it shows that Jesus had authority. So when you look back at all those, you can be like, I'm confused. Did he have it or did he not? Is it broken down? Nah. And so I believe that he has always had it. But humanly speaking, he did not have it. I know, okay? You guys are like, what? Yep, that's pretty much what I was thinking too, okay? But now, since Jesus has become the one as man who has conquered all sin and all death, he has fulfilled perfect obedience to God's plan. And he stands here on this mountain and says, I have been given all authority on earth and in the heavens. He's literally saying, I am King of the universe. So he says, right, there it is, right here. In Ephesians chapter 1, verse 20 and 20 through 23. So he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead, and this is from God the Father's perspective, and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he put all things under his feet and gave him as head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. And so you guys, we chuckled at my answer where he has all authority of God, but as man, he didn't. So he did have all authority, but he did not. But now, as the God-man, man has been, as it says in Ephesians 1, the Father, as a result of what Jesus Christ has done on the cross, conquering all sin and conquering all death, God has placed a man on his right hand as ruler of all. And I think the significance was because Jesus Christ was obedient to the Father's will, came to earth, died and rescued mankind and accomplished exactly what the Father has set out. As a result of what Jesus Christ has done and conquering sin and death, God has poured and given his Son all authority. As it says in Ephesians chapter 1, Jesus is now head over all things in the church. And I can think if he could maneuver, if Jesus could maneuver through a sin-cursed world from infancy to adulthood without sinning and accomplishing his perfect plan at the perfect time on the cross, providing a way for salvation for all who believe, fulfilling all prophecy, and accomplishing the work of God as a human, why should we ever doubt the power and sovereignty of Jesus when he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth and sits as King of the universe? We shouldn't ever. See, if we fail to grasp and to try to understand that Jesus Christ sits as King of the universe, his plan is not and cannot ever be thwarted. Because literally everything has to obey him if he decides. And that means what's going on in your life is under the direct control of the Son. And what's ever going on in our church is the direct control and the direct authority of Jesus. He knows what's happening. It's not like, oh, oops, oh, I forgot about that. There's nothing. Everything is working towards the Son's perfect plan. And when he was on earth, when Jesus was on earth, everything worked together. I mean, yes, it was for the Son's plan, but honestly, for the betterment of humanity, right? I mean, he died on the cross, paving a way for all of us to have forgiveness of sins. It's not like he has suddenly stopped. So what's going on right now is for the good of humanity. Even when it doesn't look like it. Did it look like it was for the good of humanity when Jesus died? His disciples didn't think so. It looked like evil had won. And then Jesus is like, ha! I'm back. Can't beat me. And it goes, and so when we approach the Great Commission here to come, I think if we skip verse 18, then verses 19 and 20 can actually generate and create fear. It can create guilt. It can create all this pressure. Because when we preach it without saying and acknowledging that Jesus Christ and what Jesus Christ has planned is not going to be thwarted, that should completely free us from the fear and being scared of what he's asking them to do in verses 19 through 20. And I can say I have heard this passage preached so many times and listened to it and taught and explained it, and no one talks about verse 18. So I almost want to encourage you, if you happen to be one of those people who likes to write in your Bible, I would put a star by verse 18. Never, ever, ever read verses 19 and 20 without remembering verse 18. Because if he has all authority in the heavens and on earth, what he commands his disciples to do next isn't as big and scary as you think. Because that means the people that respond to your obedience, all part of God's plan. The people who reject it, that's also part of God's plan. Because Jesus Christ has been given all authorities in the heavens and on earth. So now we get to this fun point. Jesus commands us to get out there. I'm saying, some of you guys as your Bible scholars are like, actually the command in verses 19 through 20 is to make disciples. Well, thank you. And they're right. Jesus and the imperative here. And I use the word imperative means a command. It's a sense where, you can bust out the dad voice or the mom voice before your kids. There's just that tone and that attitude of command. Drill sergeants use it. There's just something there. And that's what Jesus has here. It's this imperative sense. It's a command. And there's one key verb. And what Jesus, and the word is, and you guys could underline it or whatever you guys want to do, but it's not go therefore. The command is make disciples. And Jesus there's these three, it's another fancy way of saying, there's a reason why I'm bringing all this up, is if you guys have ever heard of a participle, in Greek it is it's a word formed from a verb that is used as an adjective or an adverb. So now why we're having a little Greek and English lesson here is because Jesus wants them to make disciples. That is the thrust of what Jesus says. Based on his complete and full authority in heaven and on earth, he is commanding them to make disciples. And he uses three participles which modify and explain what making disciples look like. The first one is that go therefore. Some of your translations might say having gone. It's one of those where that's the first one. That's the one we like to skip over, I think, sometimes when studying this passage. And then the next one is baptizing. That's the second one. And the third one is teaching. And all of these modify what Jesus wants when Jesus says, go make disciples, or make disciples, by going, baptizing, and teaching. So what you can do is you can underline the verb, which is make disciples. You can put a 1 by going, 2 by baptizing, and a 3 by teaching. This is very similar to so what Jesus is in essence saying is, based on my authority and based on my power, I want you to go and make disciples like I made you. The concept was shared with in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. Paul explains to his disciple Timothy, and he says, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust or give to other faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So how Paul understood this, who was a disciple of other disciples, who was a disciple of Jesus, as Paul says, this is what I've gotten. Take this as what I've poured into you, Timothy. Take that information. Take what I've taught you. Go and make more. See, Jesus' discipleship is passing on what Jesus is to others with the intention that they will go out and do the same for others. That is what making disciples is. It's sort of like doing your best to replicate Jesus to others. So as I've learned from him, as I've learned, I will take and I go and I'll give it to others. And that person, when they take it, also learn and receive and go and pass it on. And so it keeps passing on throughout history. And that's why 2,000 years later, the church is still around. Church has been making disciples, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, for thousands of years. Now let's start with the first one here. It says, go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And so Jesus is the first participle that clarifies or explains how to make disciples is that of baptizing. Make sure good. Oh, I don't think it got stuck. There we go. Okay. It's that baptism. Now, I'm going to say from the pulpit and from Scripture and everywhere else, baptism, the act of trying to drown someone in the water, does not save anybody. It doesn't. No matter how wet you get, how little you get wet, when you get wet, it does not save you. So what is Jesus communicating by emphasizing make disciples by baptizing them? See, back in this time, in which I wish it was now, I think it is in a lot of ways, but baptism is evidence that you have believed in Jesus. People who say they are Christians and will not get baptized, usually my question is, well, why not? For many, they just haven't been taught it's important. That's a bummer. And my response is, oh no, it is. Let's get the water running. We're going in. Because it's important. Others just refuse to. And if you won't, but you are claiming you are a disciple, you are a Christian of Jesus, then I might want you to think that maybe you aren't a disciple of Jesus. Because when Jesus says make disciples, he's telling them, baptize. So if you're unwilling to do that step, maybe it's because you aren't one in the first place. And if you're allergic to water, I don't even know how that's possible. We'll find a way. Baptize you in Kool-Aid. At some point. You were baptized. There was, yeah, I forgot. We baptized Rachel. Jim had just poured a whole bunch of, Jim, remember when he Gatorade dunked me? Well, I guess I didn't clean out the baptistry as well as we thought we did. And, yeah, it was the slimiest baptism ever for Rachel. She came out and she's like, ta-da, and orange. No, not really, but that's right. So, you know what? Thank you for that. All right, I should have used that. Okay, that's perfect. All right. So, all I'm saying is we will find a way to baptize you. But if you say and if you believe that Jesus Christ is who he is and has died on the cross for your sins, and you believe, then as he commanded and he asked the disciples, go and baptize. Go, because that is the first step. Because baptism is synonymous. It is right. And I keep telling you, don't think I'm saying baptism saves you, okay? The finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross, that's what saves you. Faith is what saves you, okay? But I will say this. If you do say you have a relationship with Jesus Christ and you refuse to get baptized, then I question if you actually have faith in the first place. Because it is that big of a deal. They work hand in hand. I mean, you can read all through the New Testament, and when someone gets saved, in the water, we're going in. Because in their minds, getting baptized was synonymous. How could you say you believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross and rose again and refuse to do what Jesus says? That's a bad start. Jesus, I love you. I'm not going to do what you say. Let's start over again. Jesus Christ, so it doesn't compute, and that's why. And now, I'm really trying to emphasize this because if there's someone out here today who has not been baptized, if they do, please talk to me. It's not scary. I haven't drowned anyone yet. Okay? I was close once. No, joking. But no, I haven't drowned anyone yet. And it is important because as with baptism, what you are saying when you're getting baptized, you're saying, I believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross and was buried. Go underwater. And as Jesus Christ didn't stay there, see, because if I drowned you, I would be missing half the step, okay? Jesus Christ rose again and has news to life. And so the imagery of baptism is, I believe that as Jesus Christ has done this, I believe that I have done it as well. That because of what Jesus Christ has done, I have died to my sin. And I have rose again in newness of life. They go hand in hand. So anytime An adult says, hey, I believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins. I'm like, let's think about baptism. Now for children, I'm usually more careful. Specifically because I was manipulated as a child to get baptized before I was ready. I'm not going to make that mistake with the kids. I want it to be theirs. And theirs alone. But adults, you're old enough. We're dunking you. We're going in, all right? And so when Jesus says baptize, what he is saying is, as you make disciples, the only way you can make disciples first is, since baptism is synonymous with evangelism, you have to go out and evangelize, and people have to get saved. Because if no one ever goes out and makes and gets and encourages people to get saved and to get baptized, eventually all the Christians will die and there will be no more disciples. It has to start somewhere. And Jesus says it starts by sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and getting them baptized. Begin, make disciples by doing that. The second one is that of teaching. And he says, so you make disciples first by going and baptizing, going and sharing the gospel. The second one is teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Now, this was one that pretty much means we need to start Matthew chapter 1 all over again. Because we got to remember, everything is commanded. Matthew leaves it in there specifically to make sure what Matthew has shared and what he has commanded and what he's worked. Go take this, pass this on to those people. Teach them as I have taught you. See, Jesus Christ, he taught in small groups, I think. He taught in little life groups on hillsides and in mountaintops. He went out and he taught in the temple and he taught before large crowds. And Jesus taught in what I consider life situations, such as walking on the water and such as things like that, where you can't really replicate those events. They just sort of happen, just like life. When life hits you, a lot of times you weren't expecting it. Jesus taught in those situations as well. Those sailors didn't expect the giant superstorm to come in and try to kill them. But it happened. This is one of the reasons why we as a church, I think, have been making strides that our place of ministry is not just inside the church building. But as Jesus Christ taught the crowds, as he taught the groups, and he's taught in life, that we would move our disciple-making process, not just here, but also in our homes. See, the word church comes from a German word that means worship building, Kirch. That word does not exist in the New Testament. Yet where do we tell our kids we're going? To church. It's just happened. And it's not going to change. It just is. But having everything happen in the worship building, ministry wasn't confined to just here. And as a result of focusing strictly on the building, what happened through history, and I think you guys can watch this with the formation of the Roman Catholic Church, is making disciples became the job of, and I put this in quote, educated Christians inside the worship building. And we know that one side decided to take that, and where they were the only ones who could read the Bible, you could not trust the masses with it. It became a very hierarchical, very organized, very pointed, it's just about the pastor. And a lot of Baptists practice, and I'm only speaking to what I know, okay, but I know there's other ones. But many Baptists have become solely focused on, I, or the pastor, am the only one who can pass on spiritualness because I am the educated one. I went to Bible school. I did, whatever. And so it becomes very focused on, it happens, leaders. And I think this accidentally happened in Sunday school classes as well, where discipleship, teaching, training became teachers giving you facts, and that was the extent of your discipleship. A bunch of Christians with a whole lot of head knowledge, and I've seen it happen in a complete inability to connect with the lost world and share their faith of Jesus Christ with them. And it's because the church became a place that brought everybody into one style of ministry, one place, and it equipped a bunch of incredibly intelligent, incredibly smart Christians with a complete inability of sharing their faith with others. So have we accomplished what Jesus Christ said by making disciples if we haven't made them? And I say that, and I want to be very careful. I'm not saying it specifically as a rebuke to our church, or rebuke to Baptist, or rebuke to whatever. But over the last, you can track this thing hundreds of years, it became slowly more and 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 more focused on the pastor and the people and just what happens here. See, and when Jesus Christ taught, he taught through situations just like this. He taught large groups. He taught in smaller groups for just to select disciples there, but he also taught through life situations such as people's illnesses and storms of life. And he used those situations, even with the feeding of 5,000. The people were hungry. That is something that Jesus Christ could minister and use to teach. And so Jesus Christ's ministry of making disciples was not just in a building. It was all over. It was in life. Jesus wants them to command and to observe all that he has commanded them. Now the last one, and I think is a very neglected participle in Jesus' command, and that is of the word go. Now, I personally could not find out why they translated the way they did. Go, therefore, and. The assumption here, when it's written in the Greek, is not go, therefore, it's having gone then. So the assumption is, Jesus is making the assumption, the only way you can baptize and you can teach is having gone out. And this participle oftentimes gets glanced over and glossed over. We don't even really think about that one. But this modifies and this explains how Jesus said, this is how you make disciples, by going. Going out then, getting out. You have to move. You have to get new people. Having gone out, make disciples. And so the last one is that of going. See, part of making disciples is going out, not waiting on people to come in. It is going out into the world just like Jesus did. And if you want to clarify this, this would be considered, the phrase is like lifestyle evangelism, okay? And that is where you as a Christian live life with other people out there. Not just your only friends shouldn't be just church people. The only time you hang out and do social events shouldn't just be church people. There's an idea where you live the Christian faith amongst people out there. You are using opportunities out in society to train and to teach Christians that you're connected with, but also to go and to make disciples. Because this having gone is really in the back of your minds. Jesus says, having gone out, that means I leave the church building, and there's an idea that I am teaching those who have been baptized, those who have been saved. I am teaching and educated and showing in life, how to follow Jesus. That's one thing. But the next thing is, having gone, I have to go and I have to actually baptize, evangelize, share the gospel, share my faith with others. This happens not here. It happens out there. Let me tell you, church, no matter how hard we try, and I think and there's some level that we should attempt, but no matter how hard we try, church is going to be a little weird for unsaved people. It just is. Who in their right mind comes and listens to some guy blab about the Bible? Who? You got to be nuts to do that. It doesn't happen. Even if the guy's really awesome and a really great communicator. What? You go and sing songs to an imaginary something, and you listen to some guy talk about imaginary something from some book that's thousands of years old. Sounds legit. It sounds kooky. Come on, guys. It sounds a little kooky, okay? If we haven't grown up in this culture, that is an odd thing to do. It's really odd. And I see you guys pretty regularly, once a week. And you guys just keep coming back. Weirdos, come on. It's an odd thing. And that's why the church, the building itself, is not really the ground that people profess faith. It happens. But what happens is when we go out, as Jesus says, when we are out in society and living there, that is where people are trained. And that is where the gospel is shared as people live and experience life. See, living and serving in the community like Jesus did when he was here, Jesus Christ ministered to the homeless. I think issues of, especially nowadays, of social justice and serving those in need, these are areas where lifestyle evangelism comes into play, where your faith is demonstrated as real going out. I want us to think about this for a minute, okay? This is in your head, okay? But is our church characterized by going out or just waiting for them to come in? Because if that's the case, what we're literally saying is, Jesus is saying, make disciples, baptizing, teaching. There's no expectation of going out, but Jesus didn't do that. See, is our church characterized by teaching or by evangelism, or if you want to go lifestyle evangelism, when you're out and about serving and demonstrating Jesus out there? Now, before you place guilt on yourself, okay, or you choose to plug your ears and refuse to listen, yes, when I talk evangelism, many of us do that. They have an internal ear plugger. I'm like, we should share the not listening. I want us to look at Jesus' command this way, because oftentimes we can use this and I can guilt people, and all of you guys need to go on and do more, and you're all a bunch of lazy bums, and none of you are doing anything, and that is not what I'm communicating whatsoever. But I want us to look at this command this way. I believe that all of us are naturally gifted and either going, baptizing, or teaching. So where would you fall in that? So here's some questions, all right? So if baptizing, now remember when I say baptizing, this is not your ability to drown people. This is not your swimming instructor. This is sharing the gospel. This is going out and the actual start of making disciples, all right? So these are some things maybe that might characterize you, okay? You love sharing the gospel. I know people, literally every word out of their mouth, they're somehow sharing the gospel. I went to church with one lady. It didn't matter the event. She was somehow sharing the gospel in it. And people would respond. She used a trash can, and people were getting saved. She loved to do this part. She was all about it, all right? Other ones is you look for opportunities. So there are some people who they're just wired. They're like, oh, I met a guy here. I'm going to go see if I can share the gospel with him. Oh, there's a person there. I'm going to go share the gospel with him. And you just become known as that guy trying to share the gospel. Got these Bible study sheets I love to share with people. And, and I'm pretty sure most of you guys, if you're here newer, have all received my Bible study sheets, right? You guys can raise your hands. Yeah, we've all received. Yeah, exactly. So we've all gotten them. Now, you create opportunities is the third one. So you're looking for these doors. You're looking for ways to go to 7-Eleven. Do I go to Subway? Do I go to there? And I'm saying those because those are mine. So don't take them, okay? You're just trying to find ways of getting to know people, and you're trying to go and you share. And the last one is God seems to have gifted you. People respond and come to know Jesus when they're around you. That'd be, okay, my strength happens to be there, okay? Another one is, this aspect of teaching. Maybe you happen to be the one who just seems to be gifted at teaching. So people respond to your lessons. The other one is you naturally gather people around you and you train them. It just happens to be your thing. People just like listening to you blab on about something, It happens, and people respond well to your teaching, and you enjoy it. You do not get up in front of people and break out in a cold sweat. You don't do any of that. That's just your thing. And then lastly, understanding the Bible seems to come naturally. There's people where they can read the text. They're like, oh, well, this means blah, 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 blah. And you're like, wow. Okay, then. They're right. It took you a few hours to come to that conclusion. And they just walk up on. I knew a professor, okay, this guy was a super genius. And he probably had the Bible memorized. And there wasn't a speaker, somehow he forgot, and this is at Faith. And they're like, Dr. John, can you preach a message? He's like, okay. And he just starts preaching. And people are getting saved left and right. No, not really. But, he just boomed without even trying, because teaching comes very naturally to him. It just happened. There's a group of people that are very, very good at teaching. Okay? And then there's this last group. So right here. You enjoy being out in the community. You make friends or connections easily. You sort of see them. And this could be in mom's groups or dad's groups or military, whatever it is. It just sort of happens where you are involved and connected with a variety of things. You enjoy serving others. And there's a group of people who love getting out, and they're involved in homeless work. They're involved in social justice issues. They're involved in just volunteering at the Y. I don't know, any number of things. They seem to be wired that way. And then you have an understanding, and I think this is important, okay, that you can make an impact to those around you. It's like those people who go door to door representing and supporting a politician. They must really buy into that politician. I don't know if I would ever walk around town advertising for any politician. Ever. I don't care who he is or who she is. You want me to go out and share your flyers? Not. I might vote for you if your website's cool and flashy looking. But other than that, forget it. I'm not going to do that. But you guys know who I'm talking about. They just have this belief, and they're just out, and they're representing, and they are a part of it. They are living their life out in society. And some of you guys are right out there like, I fit none of these. I like to stay home in my fortress with the TV on. Well, I will tell you, just because you like to do that doesn't mean you're not naturally gifted in one of these. Okay, because you are gifted in one of these areas, in either baptizing, evangelizing, teaching, and going out. And I say this because are we utilizing that natural talent and that natural gift that God has given us, where we can go out and practice these things in society? Because as an evangelist, I only have so many, circles that you can get to. And it's going to take people who are going out, living life and demonstrating. It's going to do those to even get me in any, like an evangelist in any sort of connection with those people. I can't do it. And the only way that I can, and as that's sake, who's ever evangelizing can't spend all their time and discipling everybody. That is a requirement to pass off. So it is a team effort. I need you guys, and you guys need me, and we all need each other. When Jesus says we make disciples by going, teaching, by going, baptizing, and teaching. Now, what that means, if you're already demonstrating and practicing your gift and where you are good at, this doesn't mean you don't have to work on anything else. If you happen to be one who is very gifted in going out and making connections, I would encourage you, start figuring out how you can utilize and evangelizing through that. How can you put those people in connections with evangelizing? How can you do this? Or if you happen to be really good at evangelizing, but you're scared of leaving your house, talk to somebody who's going out and plan a Tupperware party or whatever you do inside your house, okay? I don't know. Tupperware parties, are they still a thing? No. Mary Kay Naily thingies, I don't know. Okay, whatever it could be. Shows you how into it I am. So, I say this because we need it. And our church has to respond by not depending on the four walls, depending on the educated Christian leaders of the church to go make disciples. It depends on you. It depends on you and us answering the call of what Jesus has said. See, the story of Jesus is not finished. This might be the end of Matthew, but it is not the end of the legacy here on earth. Tumwater First Baptist is standing on the shoulders of people 100 years ago who wanted to make a place where the Bible was preached. And they formed it, and they started it, and it grew. And they stood on the shoulders of people before them. And they stood on the shoulders of people before them. We stand on the shoulders of 2,000 years of Christian witness and testimony of people making disciples. I don't want it to stop with us. I want to be used, and I want our church to be used as the shoulders that future Christians can stand on and continue to make disciples. See, we are living and creating the chapters of Jesus' book. Jesus Christ dying on the cross and rising again was just chapter 1. It's a pretty epic chapter 1. And then every generation that followed him is another chapter of what Jesus Christ has done for people. Isn't that neat? It's not the end of the story, it's just the beginning. See, last week we saw once again that Jesus gives us hope, that Jesus is alive and he has risen. And this week, Matthew leaves his readers with this. See, remember how he talked about this, all these aspects of what covers Matthew? Well, there's one more in there. And it's this. Because this is the last thing Matthew leaves us with. What Matthew is handing them is a book. What Matthew's trying to do is Matthew's trying to communicate hope, trying to communicate the kingdom. He's trying to demonstrate how Jesus responded to that of Pharisaicalism and how he responded to Gentiles and how he was building his church and how everything fulfills in Jesus with the whole purpose, not to just fill our head with facts, not to just fill our heads with info, but to take that info from the book of Matthew and go and share it with other people and to make disciples. He wants them to take what he's recorded of Jesus and his ministry and share it with others. And if we fail to do this, we have failed to connect with Jesus as Matthew shared with him. If we are not motivated in some way and drawn to something of going out and taking what we've learned here and going and sharing with others, we've missed it. And we've missed the point. See, when you accepted Jesus Christ, it wasn't the end of your story. It was just the beginning. let us go and help others start their stories.